Hey everybody, Tyler Rowe here. I'm here with my roundtable partner, Alexandre Laizet. He's the Director of Bitcoin Strategy at Capital B, of course. Alexandre.
Thank you, Taylor. Nice to see you again and talk Bitcoin.
Absolutely. And we're always bullish, aren't we, Alexandre? So let's lead off with what Michael Saylor did this week, right? He bought some 2,500 Bitcoin at a $76,000 price in US dollars. Now, it seems like he's developed a cadence of buying every single week, and he went back into the preferred equities as this STRC product maintained its peg relative to that $100 share price. It's great to see him buying the dip and averaging down that cost basis. What do you think of Saylor's buys so far this year?
The strategy consistent buying has been one of the most bullish factors of Bitcoin since the beginning of the year. And in fact, as well, end of 2025, strategy is showing that one company is single-handedly going to push the overall Bitcoin ecosystem out of the bear market, not only because it absorbs the entire Bitcoin mining supply, but as well because it shows that the Bitcoin Treasury company playbook works and works extremely well. It also shows that it takes time. It took 5 years for strategy to really develop a digital credit strategy with listed products and discover the great innovation of Stretch. And it took a few months only for Stretch to maintain a very strong par in tough market conditions. And a lot of companies are going to follow through. And this is going to be the materialization of Bitcoin entering the financial system with a difference compared with the complete ideal of Bitcoin maximalism, of having the overall decentralization of ownership of Bitcoin in individuals, because the trend is that it's going to corporations and institutions. And at the same time, no one is forcing individuals to sell. So what is happening is really the reward of the entities that are accumulating Bitcoin, and strategy and Bitcoin treasury companies and ETFs at the end of the day are also individuals behind. So I guess it's another wave of adoption that we are witnessing. And at Capital B, we have continued to accumulate as well. We have purchased Bitcoin the last 2 weeks, and we continue. And, compared with the size of the balance sheet, those are comparable purchases. So I think that this shows and this demonstrates the strength of the Bitcoin Treasury Company model. And I think it will remind that Bitcoin Treasury Company is not only a company holding Bitcoin on the balance sheet, is a company that is consistently doing everything in its hands to accumulate more and innovate in capital markets. So I think that's very telling of the future prospects of the company. Imagine if strategy has already accumulated more than 21 capital, for example, since the beginning of the year. Imagine how will be the market and what will be the sentiment when Bitcoin doubles or triples, and all the competitors have to buy more Bitcoin to go back to what strategy was like 2 years before. And strategy is now going to accelerate again on the ATM. So I repeat, my conviction is that in 10 years, the largest assets on earth will be Bitcoin, gold, and strategy. And after that, all of the leaders in each regions with the most Bitcoin on the balance sheet. And so when you look at what is the current state of the market and you compare that with this perspective of the following 10 years, you see that there is just a lot of traders in the world and a few capital investors, as Michael would say.
You hit on the point of how much strategy is accumulating of the mine supply. They're still over 200% purchased of the total mine supply this year. And, really, strategy is on a rapid pace to accumulate 1 million Bitcoin. And as we're seeing now, that math works in a bull market or a bear market. And I am excited to see what companies, other treasury companies like Capital B, are able to do, not only in this bear market by maintaining their conviction, but where things are going to headed, like you said, when Bitcoin's price doubles or triples like we know it will. Now, from your perspective, managing, the balance sheet of a Bitcoin treasury company, how do you determine when to raise capital and when to reserve that dry powder, specifically in a bear market? And how do you help manage investor expectations when there is a drawdown?
So the end goal for Bitcoin Treasury Company is to have listed products both in equity and in credit that allows the company to take advantage of all different types of volatility in the market to raise capital in an automatized digital way, like Strategy is doing, not only with the equity, with the ATM, but as well now growingly with the credit products, Stretch notably. And so apart from that, Bitcoin Treasury Company doesn't really have the luxury of reserving the dry powder for the time that it wants to do a capital market operation. The reality is that capital markets have their own constraints and their own dynamics, and capital is available in very specific occasions. And as well, on the other side, you have opportunities that are specific to investors that are specialized in Bitcoin, for example, or that are Bitcoin maximalists. So you have 20% of investors that are long only in certain asset classes and Bitcoin specifically, for example, and you have 80% of investors that will be more hedge funds and arbitrageurs and that are there to make a fiat profit out of any asset. And typically the large deals that are made are quite dependent on the hedge funds and the arbitrageurs because they represent 60 to 80% of the books. Even if they represent 60% of a book and you have 40% of a long-term oriented asset manager, typically the long-term oriented asset manager will also typically like to be involved in a capital market operation when the hedge funds and when the arbitrageurs are in a deal as well, because the deal will be bigger. So that's why, if you wonder why all of the, or at least most of the capital markets activity in the Bitcoin Treasury Company scene outside of ATMs has been done when the market price of Bitcoin was going up, is because 90% of asset managers, even including some long onlys, are having reporting obligations on a 1 to 1 month basis. So they are typically more inclined to invest when the price of Bitcoin is in a positive trend line. And in the meantime, and that's why our ATM is now going back, and that's why Strategy ATM is very strong, is because you have days in a week, no matter the time, even if it's in a bear market like right now, you have times in the day, times in the week, times in the months, where you have spikes of volatility to the upside. And those times can be used by the Bitcoin Treasury Company to raise capital efficiently without organizing a whole roadshow with investors that lasts like 1 month or 2. So in fact, Capital B and Bitcoin Treasury companies overall really do capital markets operations in a sizable manner, where when a lot of conditions are united, and so that includes the preparation of the company during the bear markets, to prepare for the raises, to educate, to do internal roadshows with a lot of investment banks and their analysts and their equity analysts and their convertible note analysts. And then when those market conditions are ready, you can hit and you can raise capital in a way that can surprise the market, But so far, the market has been surprised more in a negative way because everyone was expected a lot of activity end of Q4 last year. And in reality, capital markets got quite tired of investing in a context where Bitcoin was going down. So at the end of the day, a Bitcoin treasury company provides levered exposure to Bitcoin over time. And so investors are more inclined to allocate substantial capital when they see the trend going back up. And I think the good news here is that, yes, we are in a Bitcoin winter, and it's the fifth of Bitcoin history, and it's completely normal. And even in that context, you have the strongest Bitcoin treasury companies accumulating and preparing for the next wave. So Strategy's stretch product is already there. Imagine what it will be able to accumulate when the market continues its trajectory and you have the track record and you have that very important effect of confidence in the market. And at the same time, you have all of the younger treasury companies like ourselves that have proven that they can sustain efficiently a bear market and continue their accumulation and not pivot and not be ashamed of talking about a Bitcoin treasury company strategy. I cannot tell you how many times I've heard in the ecosystem, oh, but this is not sufficient enough, or you should differentiate, or you should put your Bitcoin at play, and so on. And then you realize that you have certain companies that do things that put Bitcoin at risk. And then when the bear market hits, it's not that funny anymore. So on our side, we've been very conservative. And we are, however, looking at and we are evaluating different opportunities in terms of income generation as well, like inspired from MetaPlanet that has done a very great job. I think apart from strategy, a big news has been the publication of MetaPlanet results in terms of course, the Bitcoin holdings of last year and so on, but as well the Bitcoin income generation strategy, which is now generating tens of millions of revenues out of Bitcoin volatility. And it's only out of 5 to 10% of the raises that they've done that they have allocated to that strategy. And that plus the strength of the strategy ATM, when we come back to a more bullish scenario in Bitcoin price, I think will be very important stepping stones for Bitcoin treasury companies to show that the model is very strong and that in fact all over operational traditional activities are underperforming Bitcoin. And if you zoom out sufficiently, Bitcoin is up 15,000% over the last 10 years. That is 2x more than the Mag 7, like 700%, which are in turn 2x more than gold, which is as well 300%. And all of that performance was just last year. So we are in the right position, and it's just a traditional bear market in Bitcoin.
Yeah, that's great, really great insider perspective on capital raising and the myriad of factors that are at play, Alexandre. And I'm certainly bullish on Bitcoin treasury companies who are doing things right, such as your company, Michael Saylor, obviously leading the charge on doing those roadshows, educating institutional investors, so that when the opportunity comes and Bitcoin's has a price reversal to the upside, those funding deals are ready to go. And I think we forget, Bitcoiners on the whole, because we're so focused on Bitcoin, the asset, and not the broader capital market sometimes, that there are rotations into different asset classes all the time that happen. There's the AI trade, there's the gold trade, right? Various debasement trades and other trades. And just being ready to go when Bitcoin makes its move, I think it is so important. And you said that being conservative has rewarded some of the Bitcoin Treasury companies in this bear market, and I'm curious to see, if some companies do follow that MetaPlanet strategy for some what I view as an investor as kind of a low risk way to add some more Bitcoin and alpha on top of it to the balance sheet. Now, I do want to dig into a big story this week has been kind of I guess the slow implosion of Nakamoto. They're a treasury company that has taken, a lot of heat and a lot of flack from some, analysts maybe on Twitter, amateur analysts. And of course, their stock price has taken a big hit recently. They've acquired BTC Incorporated, which is the parent company of Bitcoin Magazine and the Bitcoin conferences, and UTXO Management, which is a hedge fund in the Bitcoin ecosystem, all connected with their founder, David Bailey. What went wrong with Nakamoto? Why is sentiment so low with them specifically? And full disclosure, I am a Nakamoto shareholder. I have a small 5-figure allocation to the stock, but should David Bailey have done something different at the beginning to take these companies public, to maybe make the merger more comprehensive from the beginning? Obviously, a lot of people have been critical of the PIPE deals that Nakamoto went to market with and some of the convertible bonds he's had to refinance several times. How do you view, all of the news surrounding Nakamoto?
I think the most important thing is to distinguish between the share price of a company and the company itself. The company itself is exactly doing what it aims for, which means that it is going to absorb the different companies between Bitcoin Magazine and UTXO and BTC Inc. And that was, of course, the plan of Nakamoto, and that is making a lot of sense for David Bailey's company to push forward Bitcoin adoption and Bitcoin education in the public stock market. At the same time, you have as well a phenomenon which is the public stock market and the share price evolution. And you have, of course, a lot of shareholders that have undergone a difficult situation with a share price that has gone down dramatically following the PIPE deal. And you have a lot of explanations for this. Most of them are related to some investors in the PIPE deal, and notably the convertible debt structure that involves investors that sometimes are not completely aligned with the long-term vision of the company. And at the same time, everyone was applauding that Nakamoto was able to acquire 5,000 Bitcoin with the proceeds. And so the story could have been slightly different as well if Bitcoin had skyrocketed to the levels that were expected by a lot of analysts by Q4 2025. And on the other side, well, those types of structures can also be quite difficult for investors when the underlying asset is going down and the Bitcoin Treasury company investing in Bitcoin Treasury companies is undergoing a difficult time in the share price. But that is to be distinguished from the underlying thesis and the underlying team and the underlying sets of companies that are among the most important in the space. So I think people forget that David Bailey's company has originated the Bitcoin conference for now close to a decade. and that it has also given the birth to the new Bitcoin Treasury company ecosystem that we have seen by being extremely involved with MetaPlanet since the beginning, with, of course, UTXO management, with Saylor events that has done a very pioneer job, and I would say an impressive job at demonstrating what is the value proposition of a Bitcoin treasury company in the early stage after strategy and with strategy. So I think that this is forgotten. UTXO was among the best performing hedge funds, let's say, last year, with, of course, investing in MetaPlanet, investing in Capital B ourselves, investing in a smarter web. And so everybody is, of course, congratulating a lot MetaPlanet, Capital B, Smarter Web, based on the adoption of Bitcoin that we push forward in each jurisdictions. And I would say that Nakamoto doesn't get enough credit for the contribution to Bitcoin that they do on the media side, on the defense of Bitcoin's interests as well, with the adoption, of course, of Bitcoin for Corporations initiative with strategy. And for example, the MSCI consultation that has been provided. And I'm not even mentioning, of course, the implication in the election of Donald Trump, even from a purely agnostic perspective, by allowing the President of the United States to understand Bitcoin and to add that as a strategic component to its campaign. I would also add, of course, freeing Ross, I think, is quite important. And overall, I think that this is quite normal in public markets to have difficulties in a specific quarter, half year, year. I think David is building for the very long run. David is motivated by hyper Bitcoinization, and he's doing everything in his hands to achieve that. And I'm very bullish on the future of Nakamoto, the company. I cannot speak about, of course, the share price that is above my pay grade, that I am not involved, of course, in the company, and I am not. It is not my role. But what I would say is that the great contributions to Bitcoin of Nakamoto and the team will be rewarded, because the world works like that. If you do the right things over time, even if you have difficult situations, I'm pretty sure that the team will find out solutions for this. And yes, you could, of course, argue that you've had convertible debt, that you could have overturns and so on. But a lot of the times, a lot of critics are not really involved in public capital markets. And the terms, were not definitely criticized at the outset when the deal was published as well. So then when you look back in the past, you can criticize what's been done. And I think that there is also education in public markets that is happening. And I'm pretty sure that Nakamoto and the team will look at the past and build a very bright future. And I'm very much looking forward to the Bitcoin conference in Las Vegas that is coming, at the Strategy World Conference as well, where there is a Bitcoin for Corporation, of course, event too. And so I think it's a difficult time for the company, but for Nakamoto in that respect now. And I think in terms of the share price, but in fact, the integration of the operational companies is a very positive, I think, signal that you have both operations in Bitcoin and investments in Bitcoin and of course holdings of Bitcoin Treasury companies. And I wish them well, and I'm sure they will also respond point by point, apparently, to a recent article that was published. And I think it will provide some light into the position of Nakamoto in that respect. And I think one thing that I would like to mention from the capital B side is that it also demonstrates that it is important to remain conservative when it comes to capital markets activity, and that a lot of terms can appear as very attractive when it's signed, but then when you look further down the line, you see a lot of consequences. So that's why, for example, of course, we have not done structures that are very short term so far. And that's why if we do innovation in terms of capital markets activity, we will be very conservative in terms of the leverage that is applied and the counterparties. But, I think Nakamoto also did their best, and I wish them to continue in terms of the solutions that I'm sure they will find. And I'm very bullish on the team. I'm sure that they will find a way. And congratulations as well to the shareholder base that is holding through that difficult session. I think we will come back to a Bitcoin spring and to a Bitcoin bull market, and that the Berkshire Hathaway of Bitcoin treasury companies we will come back in strength as well. So good luck and Godspeed to Nakamoto.
You raise a lot of good points there, and I think, as an investor myself in several Bitcoin treasury companies, something I'm always looking at is, do you have confidence that the management team can execute? And I think, early on, until there is a track record, what do you have to base it on? You've got projections and hopes and dreams, but you've got to be able to invest in a management team that you think can execute. And I think to see BTC Inc. and UTXO, the operations side of things, be merge into this company or be acquired by Nakamoto, I think is only bullish for the stock. It's funny when you look on X today, what you said about Nakamoto, I think would be a contrarian take, maybe from people who are just speaking about the stock, but just less than a year ago, it was you had a very mainline opinion. I think sentiment was huge. Obviously, the MNAV was valued at 20, 25x at one point, and that's with each investment that investors make, they have to kind of consider, am I getting over my skis? Is the valuation right? But I think David Bailey's been extremely transparent through this whole process, and I do look forward to his response to that kind of hit piece that was written. I think it just goes to show that sentiment can flip so quickly on Bitcoin treasury companies, on equities in general. So building that long-term focus is really important. If Strategy had issued their first convertible notes right before a Bitcoin bear market, the whole landscape could be totally different, right? It could have taken a lot longer for Michael Saylor to build up to the place that he's at, and these things take time. I do want to pivot and talk about sovereign wealth investments in Bitcoin and iBit. There was an Abu Dhabi-based Alwarda Investments that disclosed in the fourth quarter they added to their iBit position, and that to me again is another bullish signal to see that sovereign wealth funds are adding, and may have better diamond hands than some Bitcoiners we see on Twitter.
Well, first of all, I would like to say, just to complement on Nakamoto, and you were talking about strategy. In the first bear market that strategy went through, there was, the failure of the Silvergate and the different banks. And at the time, strategy had specific bond that they had with Silvergate that they had to retire. And that was as well, a difficult situation at the time. And now, just say 4 years after or 5 years, we are speaking about the largest sovereign wealth funds having diamond hands and accumulating Bitcoin, and no one is adopting any more about strategy except for some comments that commentators that want to get some views. But so I think that over time, and as Bitcoin grows and gets adopted, you have different phases of growth, and each company, of course, has to go through a first bear market where the investors test, of course, the viability and the long term potential of the company. And today you hear a lot like. The Bitcoin treasury companies are dead, but strategy is okay. But in 5 years, it would be, strategy X, Y, Z, blah, 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 are okay. But those companies, and so it's normal. It's just a wave of adoption. And so today, and since 2024, you have that stamp of approval as well on Bitcoin. And since then, and we've seen the reports to your question of the holders of iBit, and that's quite impressive. You see a very strong increase of the Bitcoin position of the Abu Dhabi sovereign wealth funds, and that's quite telling of what is happening. And you have as well talks about the first holder in the position, which might be related to Chinese investors, which is quite interesting. You have Jane Street that is holding quite some position as well. And overall, it tells you that while Bitcoin is not completely integrated yet in the financial system, you have now a way for institutions to get exposure, and they are FOMOing in Bitcoin at those levels. They are also, of course, waiting for the Bitcoin price to come back to potentially accumulate more too. But what you see is they hold. They are not selling, and they continue to accumulate. And over time, the charts of individuals and institutions holding Bitcoin will be flipped around. Bitcoin will be held 70% by institutions and corporations, and 30% by governments, and 30% by individuals, because over time you will have more and more advantages and options in the financial ecosystem to store Bitcoin and to amplify Bitcoin and to get different types of volatility exposures. So that is just 2 years after the launch of the ETFs, and you already have the largest sovereign wealth funds, and of course Norway sovereign wealth funds as well, and Switzerland and Luxembourg and so on. And so I hope France is going to follow through at some point, but we have other issues to get through before, I guess. So same for the Netherlands. Now the Netherlands is proposing that unrealized gains tax. So I think we have some room to grow in terms of progress, but pretty bullish.
Yeah. Yeah. Can we talk about that? What the Netherlands was proposing with that, unrealized capital gains tax? I mean, that is pure confiscation, right? It's almost as if it was crafted by someone who, you would say, doesn't even understand how investing works. To confiscate unrealized gains, is just if that were to take hold, that's disastrous for the startup industry. It's disastrous for people who have a long-term investment horizon, Alexandre. And what's behind the thinking there, you know?
Well, first of all, I would say that that government has been corrected or has had a negative comment from Christine Lagarde, the ECB president. And so, if you do something in finance and economics and you are corrected in the traditional sense, because Bitcoin is something else, but by Christine Lagarde, and Christine Lagarde tells you that what you do is wrong in the traditional world, not in Bitcoin, I think you have some issues. And so even Christine Lagarde said that that proposal of legislation was a big mistake, that in order to prevent capital outflows, it was much better to incentivize investments than to penalize them. And I think it's quite logic. I hope Christine Lagarde would have the same comments around Bitcoin. But she also announced that she is going to step down just after the president of the Banque de France as well. And that is because I think that there is fear in terms of the government looking at different types of elections coming, and they want to be able to choose the next presidents of those central banks before new elections come in. And so I hope that we will have, as the US had its moment with the return of economic uh, first principles, let's say, I hope we will have the same over in the EU, depending on what political components are going on. But that Netherlands proposal is very damaging. You have already a lot of UK finance people that are moving to Abu Dhabi. I think it's millions of millionaires already. France has undergone the same as well, and you have the Netherlands now, and that's quite impressive, and that's really sad to see. And if you put that on top of the security issues, with France being top one now, it was top two. Now we are world leader in Bitcoin-related range attacks and kidnappings and so on. That's really preoccupying, and that's also part of the reason why I was saying that that picture of the percentage of individuals holding Bitcoin is probably going from 70 to 30. The important will always be that there are options for self-sovereign Bitcoin custody and use, but the trend is really this one. And I would say that, even those kidnappings are quite the same. It seems like it's a hidden tax, it's another type of unrealized gains tax. It's really, really, really bad for society, where you cannot be really confident that you are in security, both from, of course, an individual safety perspective, or from a tax safety perspective. And so that's also why I think this will, over time, provide more inflows into institutions and into Bitcoin treasury companies. At Capital B, we don't hold the keys ourselves. We delegate that responsibility to a bank, and the bank is already prepared for those types of issues. And that is, for many investors, I would say 90 to 99% of investors, that is the preferred way to hold a security with a regulated custody of the assets. That can go in parallel with self-custody options for all Bitcoin maximalists in the world that want to access sovereignty. But a lot of Bitcoin maximalists also want to have access to the traditional financial system, and to have credit, and to buy houses, and to live their life. So overall, the overall picture in Europe, for example, I think is very bullish for institutional development of Bitcoin offerings and for Bitcoin treasury companies. And if you put the security aspect with the tax advantage aspect of a Bitcoin treasury company with, on top of that, the policy of the Europe to incentivize investment in European-based companies, I think, and plus the trend of political parties proposing the privatization of the pension system, which is currently a complete Ponzi scheme where you are a young person working in France and you pay directly for the pension programs of your grandparents, but nobody is capitalizing for your own pension. So you basically have to pay for the pension of your grandparents and be very sure that you will not have any pension from the government because it is really a Ponzi scheme, and that you have to plan for it yourself. And so I think Bitcoin and Capital B are going to play a crucial role in the coming 10 years for people to really be able to keep the value of their work over time and space.
Yeah, it's really interesting you talk about the pensions because, even when I was in my university education, they were kind of preparing millennials in my generation that, the pension system, the social security in the United States is an unsustainable scheme where you are paying for your grandparents' retirement. And, that works when there's baby booms, right? And you're having a lot more kids and there's a lot more workers. But it's, as soon as the population rate grows, the Social Security Administration here in the United States, on their own website says in the year 2033, I believe it is 2034, that the U.S. pension becomes insolvent. So they're going to have to either raise the retirement age, which they've done several times in the past, which is a soft default, or they're going to have to reduce benefits or find some other way to fund that program. So yeah, Bitcoin, I think that's, part of the reason why I personally understood Bitcoin is because Bitcoin is kind of that self-sovereign asset that you can use to store your wealth that you accrue through your working lifetime and provide a better promise for yourself and your family in the future. There's a few things to unpack here, Alexander, with what you said. You talk about institutions probably owning upwards of 70% of all the Bitcoin, and Bitcoin maximalists like ourselves take a couple different approaches. There's the real hardcore, I would say, self-sovereigns who say that self-custody is the only way and are just, hate to see some of the institutional adoption, which I think is to their detriment. But, I think there is a bit of a shift in the narrative of Bitcoin self-sovereignty, is that the really important thing is that you can take self-custody. So to be able to integrate into the public markets, to integrate into the legacy financial system, your Bitcoin holdings, to access credit, to access different custody models, I think is really important. And there's a lot of native Bitcoin companies that led the charge on custody. So if you're someone out there who bristles at the thought of, everybody in the world not self-custodying their Bitcoin, remember that you always can self-custody your Bitcoin. And I think that's one of the big unlocks that Bitcoin provided, because you certainly can't do that with gold. It takes forever to be able to get your gold or to redeem it. You can't even redeem shares of the GLD ETF. And I hope there are some mechanisms for these Bitcoin derivative products for us to be able to take self-sovereignty in the future. You also talked about Lagarde being on the same side of Lagarde against the wealth tax in the Netherlands. And it's funny to, as Bitcoiners, sometimes we hate these central bankers, but even they don't have complete nonsense all the time in the way they analyze these. And I am curious to see how Europe moves with some elections for the European Central Bank. Here in the United States, of course, we talked about on the last roundtable that Donald Trump has nominated Kevin Warsh to replace Jerome Powell as chair of the Federal Reserve. And I dug into some of Kevin Warsh's talks and his writings over the last week a little bit, and he really is someone who's advocated for lower federal funds rate and shorter term interest rates, which is something I think Donald Trump will cheer on and made sure that he was aligned on. But he has talked a lot about tapering the balance sheet of the Federal Reserve. And now, we in the United States, we've got a government who has a multi-trillion-dollar deficit that they're spending, and no signs of that slowing down. A lot of that spending is mandatory. It's defense, which the United States spends $1.5 trillion on its defense a year. It's Medicare, it's Medicaid, it's Social Security. These are all mandated programs, that the administration can't even chip into. So the spending is going to continue, and I find I'm in this weird spot as a Bitcoiner where you want your government to show fiscal restraint, but when they don't, it helps secondarily helps the price of Bitcoin because it is a hedge against, the debasement and the debasement trade. So, how attuned is someone who's running a Bitcoin treasury company in Europe and based in the Middle East, Alexander, to what's going on in the United States?
It may sound a bit contradictory with what I said before, but I've never been so bullish about the United States and Europe. Part of it is because, of course, I'm European and with Western civilization roots, and that is part of it, of course. And the other side is that we are adopting Bitcoin very aggressively overall. The banks and the political establishment now in the US, but as well the banks, all the systemic banks are very much adopting Bitcoin, and that's extremely positive. And if we take a step back, Europe and the US have undergone much more difficult times in history. So, when it comes to Europe, France has survived the two world wars and an invasion by the Nazis, and with the great support, of course, of the United States and the UK. And, we speak a lot about the issues at play. We speak about everything that is going wrong in the very short term. But in fact, I'm very bullish on our capacity to turn things upside down and to have the capacity to build strong foundations for the future. I really believe in that meme of, the hard times create a strong men, and strong men create good times, and so on. So I hope that with Bitcoin, the good times will not create weak men, but I am very bullish on Europe and the United States with Bitcoin. And I think that's what Ray Dalio gets probably not wrong, I would say, but misses a lot when he describes, in his latest piece that has made quite some noise recently on X, where he describes that the world order is coming to an end and that this is obvious. And in my view, this is all correct except for Bitcoin and except for Venezuela, because when the United States has acquired Venezuela effectively, I think something huge happened. Is that the United States was able to secure 30 more years of money printing because of the scarce resources that were acquired. And with the great liberation that this meant for the population, and I'm pretty sure that the US will be able to find the right balance between maintaining the respect of the locals, let's say, and their culture and their will to have a self-defined future, but with the strength of the military protection of the US and the energy production, and that is the equivalent of Saudi plus the UAE combined in terms of resources, natural resources. And I think that's extremely significant, and that people completely underestimate that aspect. And I think Cuba is probably going to go on the same path, and that this will be extremely bullish for the US. And the other side is, I think the term of Donald Trump is not finished, and that Bitcoin at some point will be adopted by the United States government in some way. It might come from the sovereign wealth fund that they have as a project as well, and it might even come from some exposure not only with Bitcoin but with Bitcoin treasury companies, and especially strategy, for example. I have no information on the matter, but if I were there as the Republican Party in the US and I wanted to get a re-election of the Republican Party, I would probably keep that Bitcoin reserve for the end, or do as if I was not going to do it and do it still. So I think this could be the big play that the US could do, is to dump gold and buy Bitcoin, or to keep the gold and buy more Bitcoin. I think the bit bonds are quite important. And so if you put all of that in perspective, I think that the importance of the Fed chair, which is extremely important, in fact, for global capital markets overall and the capital markets activity. And to your question, yes, we look at it very closely. The US rules the world, frankly. The French banks, they just do the same as the American banks, and the French political leaders, they follow the steps. We have 4 years of delay, but we follow the steps. At the same time, we have our own independence and innovations and engineering background over in Europe, and I think a great sense of self, like the criticism that is necessary to think of your own. I think that's something that's very important in terms of philosophy and in terms of thinking about freedom. I think the France has played quite some role there, and I think it's a great partnership. Europe and the US. I hope that there will be more synergies, and I'm pretty sure that we will find a way. And then I think that yes, the Fed chair will probably lower interest rates, and at the same time, it will not be the full-blown party because you have that balance between the Republican Party of yes, you want to, of course, push for more economic activity, and low interest rates can provide for that. And at the same time, you don't really like money printing as a concept. So I think it will be balanced and overall quite aligned with the Bitcoin strategic reserve opportunity. But it will. I'm not sure this will be a short-term gain. I think it will be more like towards the end of the mandate of Donald Trump, and that will coincide quite greatly, I think, with the next wave of Bitcoin adoption and the next bull cycle. And it's quite probable that by then we will have a lot more pension funds and a lot more sovereign wealth funds. And I'm quite convinced that the US will make a move as well.
Love it. Alexander, always bullish. And I really appreciate your global perspective, your European perspective on, what's happening in the United States, because it's so easy for, small government types such as myself to to look at the negatives and focus on, what's not going right. But there is so much to be hopeful for, and I hope Bitcoin can be one of those catalysts that, kind of bring the West and whoever else wants to jump on board, towards freedom and towards these goals of, building an economy that is vibrant.
Yeah, and exactly. And I wanted to add on top of what you said on the self-custody topic, if you know how to drive a car, you will probably be able to know how to self-custody, and nothing replaces self-custody. And I wanted to say that, we say hardcore Bitcoin maximalist. I think, in fact, the Bitcoin maximalists are the most conservative, because when we say hardcore, it seems like it's something very aggressive, or very extremist, let's say. But in fact, it's the most conservative and the most common sense thing to do. And on the other side, what I notice on X is a lot of maximalists that, because they believe that, they will then criticize a lot the adoption of Bitcoin by the financial ecosystem, and say that everything is a scam and so on. But the fact of the matter is, the world runs on trust, and that is where Bitcoin plays a counterbalance, where it is don't trust, verify, and that is extremely important. But the people that will ultimately choose to self-custody and to be the hardcore Bitcoin maximalist, as you said, are probably like 1%, 5% of the population. And you also need to provide for a form of Bitcoin exposure to 95 to 99% of the population. And I think this contributes to Bitcoin adoption overall. And each entity that adopts Bitcoin is great for Bitcoin. There is this debate. I think it might be playing a role as well in the US strategic reserve, where you have part of Bitcoiners that think that it is not the role of the government to acquire Bitcoin, that they should, give back the money if they have to the citizens. My view is that the government, as much as individuals themselves, or as much as companies or institutions, they have a rational interest to hold Bitcoin and to acquire more Bitcoin, and it is in the interest of that entity. And so I hope that over time we are able to form a great team, and that Bitcoin treasury companies are also more valued for what they are, not only the share price, but the company behind and the team behind. And that's what we mentioned for Nakamoto. But behind those companies, you have people that are motivated by increasing Bitcoin adoption, advocating for it. And I think that's a net positive for Bitcoin. And as well as, of course, Bitcoin Treasuries .net with you, Tyler, and Pete. I think that's providing a lot of perspectives, and that's quite important to continue to stay humble and stack sats.
Stay humble, stack sats. Thanks for the kind words. And don't forget, Bitcoin is for everyone. For Alexandre Laizet, I'm Tyler Rowe.
Cheers.
Thanks for watching.